Hey, what's going on? This is Sports Truth. I'm your host, Jordan Harris. So today we're going to be talking about the transfer portal again. If you can believe it, we're still talking transfer portal quarterbacks. And I know a whole lot of y'all are kind of at this stage where you're like, man, I'm so over it. And I can totally understand because I'm kind of at that point too, to be honest with you. But I feel like I'd be failing at my job if I didn't explain this news that's coming out because it could potentially involve our Hurricanes. So let's go ahead and talk about the two quarterbacks that jumped into the transfer portal. We're going to start with the guy out of Maryland. So this is Taulia Tagovailoa. All right, so this is Tua's younger brother. He started off at Alabama, and he ended up playing at Maryland. So let's go over some quick numbers, and then I'll tell you my thoughts on Taulia, and then we'll talk about the next quarterback after that. So let's just do a deep dive into Taulia real quick. So competition-wise, I do want to go over some of his stats, and then we'll talk about the competition. So his stats overall, he had 3,377 yards. So he threw for a ton of yards this year. He had 25 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. So that's a 2-to-1 ratio, which is fine, but you would prefer to see a 3-to-1 ratio, obviously. So his numbers are okay. Like his passing yardage is great, but his his interception number is pretty high at 11. You don't really want to see that when you're talking about transferring a quarterback in who's going to be nearly gifted a starting position. You don't want to see somebody who's got 25 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. Not particularly. But then again, there's a whole lot of different things you can look at. Obviously, he's playing against some pretty stiff competition. When you look at his schedule, he played against Ohio State. They ended up losing that game 37-17. So he was 21 for 41. Not good. A little above 50%. So what is that, 51%. He had 196 yards, one touchdown, and two interceptions. He ran the ball 11 times and had 21 yards and one touchdown against Ohio State. So not great yards. Not great stats. But then again, he was playing against a team that was far superior talent-wise than the team that he was on. So that's that. Now let's talk about Penn State. They ended up losing 51-15 against Penn State. He was 29 for 39, which is 75%. It's pretty good. And he had 286 yards, two touchdowns, and one interception. He ran eight carries for negative 47 yards. So he got sacked a bunch that game. Boy. Those numbers are not, the completion percentage is really good. He did have an interception, and he obviously held onto the ball a lot if he nearly had negative 50 yards on the ground. It's pretty tough to see there, too. I do want to talk about Nebraska because Nebraska was solid, not great, but they were solid. So they won that game 13-10. He was 27 for 40 with 283 yards, one touchdown, one interception, and he didn't really do anything on the ground either. To play against Nebraska, we saw what Colorado did against Nebraska, right? And Colorado did a good number on Nebraska. So for Maryland to put up 13 points against them, that's not great. Two more games that I want to highlight here. I want to talk about Michigan because at that time Michigan was number 3, but they're obviously ranked number 1, and they're probably going to win the whole thing right now. So they lost that game 31-24. So they put up 24 points against him. He was 21 for 31, 247 yards. His completion percentage was 68%. He had 0 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. And he didn't do anything on the ground. He was 8 carries, negative 43 yards. So he obviously got sacked quite a bit that game too. The last game I want to talk about, which is really, really key because it's the same team that we played against, which is Rutgers. Or actually, I want to talk about one more team after this. But he played against Rutgers. This was their last game. Okay, so, and like I said, obviously this is important because if he were to transfer to Miami, he would most likely be competing against JB11, right? So he'd be competing against Curry Brown. And we need to be looking at what Brown did against Rutgers and then compare the same thing what Tagovailoa did against Rutgers. It just makes sense. It's logical, right? So he ended up scoring, it was 42-24. So they won that game. They scored 42 points. He was 24 for 31, 77 completion percentage, 361 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. So this was an excellent game. Okay, 24 for 31, 361 yards, 77% completions, and then 3 touchdowns and 1 interception. That's a lot better than what Ja'Carry Brown did. I mean, obviously they're playing on different teams. I understand that. But you got to compare that. That's as close to apples as you can possibly get. So he played an outstanding game against Rutgers. The other team that they played against was an ACC team, which was Virginia. They won that game 42-14. He was 19 for 30, 342 yards, and then he had 63 completion percentage with 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions. So his stats, like I said, they're fine. I'm not blown away by it, especially the fact that he had 11 interceptions. I think that number is really high. But the fact that he was able to play against the two teams, we're very familiar with Virginia. They're in the ACC. And then we played against Rutgers. So he showed out against both of those teams. That's impressive. Those interceptions just scream at me, though. 11 interceptions and then 25 touchdowns. I don't love that ratio, that 2-to-1 ratio. So let's talk about something else about Taulia. Okay, so he is in a super weird position right now. People are talking about how great he would be playing here and playing there, but the problem is he's already played all of his eligibility. So you're probably thinking, well, what the heck is he doing in the transfer portal? It's because he's trying to get a waiver from the NCAA to grant him another year. So this is a weird deal, man. Like, he's in the transfer portal, but he may not even be able to play in college next year. And what they're working on, and I can actually read from an article, the point that Taulia's family is trying to make is that when he played at Alabama, I'm just going to read this to you actually. So at Alabama in 2019, he played in 5 games, which is 1 more than you're allowed to play to preserve your red shirt. So if you play 4 games, you can still red shirt for the year. He played 5 that season. His 5th game that season entailed just 2 snaps at the end of a 38-7 win over Mississippi State. The only reason why he played in that game, as he put it, the only reason why he played in that game was to honor his brother Tua, who had suffered a hip injury that ended his season prematurely. So they are trying to appeal to Alabama, to Maryland, because they got to both sign off on this, and they're trying to appeal to the NCAA to get that year back. And if the NCAA does clear him to get that extra year, then obviously it makes sense for him to be in the transfer portal because he'll have 1 more year of eligibility, right? So that's kind of weird, but one of the reasons why people are linking him to Miami is because his brother plays for the Miami Dolphins. He's a star quarterback for the Miami Dolphins, and apparently this family is super tight, and they would love to be in the same city. Miami Hurricanes, Miami Dolphins, both are both are the starting quarterbacks. That's what they're hoping for in this situation, which makes sense because my family is just as tight. So, but yet he's a senior. He's 5'11", 208 pounds from Hawaii. That's all I really want to cover when it comes to Taulia Tagovailoa. So let's go ahead and switch gears here, and we'll talk about the other quarterback. And I know I'm chuckling. I probably shouldn't be chuckling because that may come across as disrespectful. I'm not trying to do that. But I'm just kind of, to be honest with y'all, I'm kind of in shock that it's come to this for us. Because it looked like when this transfer portal thing first popped off, it looked like we were going to have our pick of the litter. Like, yeah, let's bring that 4 or 5-star transfer over. Now it's just like we're playing musical chairs. Like, who wants to come play for us? Would you play for us? Would you play for us? It's kind of crazy. But the other person, the guy you see on the far right of your screen, is Reese Poffenbarger. So he plays for Albany Great Danes. This is an FCS school. He's a sophomore, 6 feet tall, 210 pounds from Maryland. Okay, so let's look at his numbers. He was He threw the ball for a gang of yards this year. So it was 3,614 yards, 36 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. So he was 3 touchdowns away from having a 3-to-1 ratio, which is excellent. If you just look at his numbers up and down this game log, like they are outstanding. He's got really good numbers everywhere. He threw for 300 yards. Let's see, one, two, three, four times this year. Most of the time, he was in the high or mid 200 yards when he throws the ball. I really don't even want to go through this game log and point out specific games because he played in the FCS. So that none of these teams, well, hell, most of these teams you probably never even heard of, to be honest with you. Like, he played against Hawaii, like we've heard of Hawaii. He played against Morgan, Villanova, Towson, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Maine, William and Mary's, like Richmond. So, yeah, bro played against some teams that were not world beaters. Let's just say that. And I looked at some highlights. I didn't even look at a full game of his, which weird fact actually. I took my family out to eat some pizza. This is when we got back from the Bahamas, and I looked up at a game, and it was Albany playing against some school. It was San Diego State. It was in like the game before the championship, and that team was losing 59-0. And I didn't think anything of it until I watched these highlights today, and I'm like, oh, that was that game I was watching the pizza place. But anyway, I digress. So once again, like, sure, he has some crazy good numbers. And I guess I'll just point out I'll point out two games. Okay, let's talk about him playing against Hawaii. They ended up losing 31-20. He was 10 completions for 31 attempts. He had 93 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 1 interception. The dude is super fast, though. He runs the ball a lot. He scored 6 touchdowns this past season. I'm kind of shocked that people are excited about him coming to the Hurricanes. I'm trying to be a positive guy here, but like when I look at his last game against San Diego State and I see that they got beat 59-0, he was 30 for 44, 232 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. I'm like, sure, his team was probably outmatched, but bruh, like you playing against San Diego State, and I can't imagine what he would look like playing against Clemson. I just feel like his head would be spinning the whole game. So I'm not too sold on my man. I'm just not. I'm not sold on my man Reese. Not even a little bit. So God bless him, but I don't think that he'd be. I don't think he is what we need to be looking for with the Hurricanes. And I know some people are saying like sometimes it doesn't matter who you're playing against if you're playing against lower level. They say like if they move up, maybe they have the ability to move their abilities up to the next level and perform very, very well, which it's the case sometimes. It does happen. But when I think about him, Reese, the story that comes to mind is something that I heard Peyton Manning and Marshall Faulk talking about one time. So this is Peyton Manning's rookie year. A lot of y'all know that Peyton Manning threw a bunch of interceptions his first year, a whole bunch of interceptions. And they said that, like, Marshall Faulk was telling the story. He said one time Peyton Manning threw an interception, and this was like mid-season. And he had a bunch of interceptions at this point already. So he threw an interception. They went to the sideline, and Peyton Manning was like, man, Marshall, I didn't think that he'd be able to get to that ball. Talking about the defensive back. I didn't think he'd be able to get to it. And Marshall was like, yeah, he did close on that ball pretty quick. So then next couple games, Peyton Manning threw another interception. And they go to the sideline, and Marshall Faulk was like, Peyton Manning is sitting over there, and once again he looked at me and he said, I did not think that he could close on that ball that fast. I didn't think he could get to it. I didn't think he could get to it. And Marshall was like, yeah. So then the next game, Peyton threw another interception. And Marshall Faulk heard Peyton Manning say again, I threw that ball, and I just did not think he could close on that ball that fast. And then Marshall Faulk got irritated, and he said, Peyton, this is the NFL. They all can get to it. All these defensive backs can get to that ball. They all can. So stop throwing it. So when I look at somebody like Reese Poffenbarger, I feel like if you just go look at the highlights, the players that he's throwing the ball against, they are not the players that would play at Florida State or Clemson or Virginia. Like, they're just not. You know what I'm saying? So I think it would be one of those shell shock situations where the talent level goes from here, where Peyton Manning was used to playing against those teams that were in the SEC back then, Florida and whatnot. He's used to playing against those defensive backs. Now he's playing against New England with Bill Belichick. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a huge shell shock where you're like, I didn't think they could get to that. And Marshall Faulk is like, yeah, fool, they all can get to it. That's why they're in the NFL. I think that Reese Poffenbarger would play against these teams in the ACC, and he would be saying all season, I didn't think he could get to that ball. And then they'd be like, yeah, man, that's how he's Division I FBS football player. That's why he's here. So, sure, he's got great numbers. I don't think that he's our guy. Yeah, man. I honestly, just my quick opinion on all of this stuff to close this out. I cannot believe that it's come to this, man. I really can't. And I hate to admit it because I know the Florida State fans going to be out here chuckling like they always do, which is fair, but I just can't believe it's come to this. People nowadays, especially these the young athletes, they don't believe in competition too much. They think that if they're going to transfer somewhere, it needs to be to a place where where they're basically guaranteed the starting position. If they're not guaranteed the starting position, they're probably not going to transfer to your school. That's just the way it is today. Yeah, they'll only transfer if there's a starting job being handed to them. So at this point, like, if one of these guys wants to come transfer, I think our stance needs to be, sure, you can transfer here, but Ja'Carri Brown is our starting quarterback. He's got the lead on everybody. You can come in and compete for it, but we're not handing you any starting job. And that's the case with anybody that's left in the transfer portal. Not just these two guys. I mean, any of them. Because none of them are as dynamic as KJ Jefferson or Ward or like any of the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks that we were all looking at. The guys that's left are just not as dynamic as those guys. So at this point, whoever decides to transfer, if we get anybody, they need to come in knowing Ja'Carri Brown is our starting quarterback. He's ahead of everybody. Emory Brown is second. And then you'll come in as third, but you have an opportunity to jump both of those. I think that's the case that we need to make because, boy, this is a weird situation. It's weird. Those are my thoughts, man. Are you all interested, excited about either one of these two prospects? Really curious about that. Or are you in the same situation? I'm thinking where I'm like, man, Taulia, I think he would be a pretty cool addition. But Reese, I think he can just, I don't know. I think he's like, if my interest level was like, let's say if I was doing a 0 to 10 interest level, 10 means we have to have him, 0 means I'd rather not even heard his name. I would say Reese is probably at like a 2. I do not think that he needs to come play for the Hurricanes at all. With Taulia, I think that he would probably be like at a 6 or 7 just because he's got some experience. But, yeah, curious to know what y'all's thoughts are on this. The transfer portal has changed a lot. NIL deals has changed a lot. It's just making people have this mindset where things are supposed to be given to them, this entitlement. And I know I sound like an old man talking right now, but whatever. It gives them a sense of entitlement where it's like, I'm not going to come play for your program unless I know I'm going to be the starting quarterback. And then if you bring in a young player, a freshman, he doesn't play the first year, you're like, hey, man, I'm getting out of here because I need to be playing right now instead of earning the position. It just is what it is. So, yeah, man, let me know, please. Let me know what you think about these two players. Also, let me know if you think that Ja'Carri Brown and Emory Williams, if you think it should be that direction. Ja'Carri 1, Emory Williams 2. Curious to know about that. I think I might make a video about those two sometime in the near future. All right, so please do like the video, subscribe to the channel. We are still climbing towards 1,000. Been working really hard to make that goal happen. So please help in that venture. So thanks for watching the video. You could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with me, and I truly appreciate that. God bless. Take care. Peace.